So let me ask you, most of your colleagues who were from the Rajya Sabha have been are now in the fray for contesting Lok Sabha elections. Is Nirmala Sitharaman also going to contest a Lok Sabha seat this time?
No, the party did ask me. But after thinking over it for a week or 10 days, I just went back to say, maybe not. Because my party president did ask me, would you want to contest from somewhere in the south? Option is yours, Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh. But I don't have that kind of money to contest. I also have a problem because whether it is Andhra or Tamil Nadu, it's also going to be a question of, various other winnability criteria that they use. Are you from this community? Are you from that religion? Are you from this? I said, no, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. So the party was graceful enough, and I'm very grateful, to accept my arguments and said, chalo, you won't. It's all right. So I'm not contesting.
Hello friends, welcome to FDR India. Let's have a discussion with Dr. JP today about money, power in politics. Hello sir.
Hello Ankit.
Sir, recently our current finance minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman Garu, has said that in public forum that she would not be contesting the Lok Sabha elections because of two reasons. One, she says she does not have that kind of funds. And second, she said that there are other winnability criteria like what region, what community you belong to. So I want to have a discussion with you on that. My first question to you is, sir, in your estimate, what is the cost of a contesting candidate, either in Lok Sabha elections or assembly elections, and where does this money go towards?
The legal limits we all know.
Right.
As you know, for the assembly, depending on the state, it varies. Major states typically probably at 35 lakhs or something. It used to be 28. I remember 1.5 lakhs some generation ago. Lok Sabha, I think it's 90 lakhs,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. But the actual expenditure is substantially higher. And it's not uniform across the country. The worst culprits are, minus Kerala, the southern states. Many southern states, they believe they are in some ways more progressive ahead of the rest of the country. That may or may not be true in terms of social indicators, but let me disabuse some of our friends of the notion that in some ways southern states or some other part of the country are inherently superior. It's not true. Money power in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu has reached obscene proportions. They would break world records. In a state, in a poor country, for a state assembly constituency, if 25 to 30 crores of rupees, even in dollar terms at the current exchange value, it is coming to $3 to $4 million.
This is one person.
One candidate.
One candidate.
If you are a serious contender, there are many people who file nominations, but most of them are not taken seriously by the voters. So we're talking of the people who are in serious contention. And there are extreme cases where the expenditure has gone up to 50 crores. In recent times in Telangana, some of the by-elections, 100 to 150 crores per candidate. It's extreme. I don't think it is the norm yet. Hopefully it will not be the norm ever. In which case it's going up to $20, $25 million for an assembly constituency. Now, one assembly by-election in Telangana cost more than the total cost incurred by the two major parties in Britain, the Conservatives, who are now in power, and the Labour Party, in all the 650 parliamentary constituencies in the national parliamentary election. Britain roughly has the same GDP as India. Though the population is only about 4.5% of India's population, their GDP is the same as India's. Now, considering that, the whole country of Britain spends the amount equal to the extreme expenditure incurred in some by-elections to the state assembly in a state like Telangana, we must all wake up. There is a serious problem. Some states are not that bad. Bihar, whatever be its faults, from what I hear, the expenditure is obviously above the ceiling limit, but it's not so outrageously above the ceiling limit. Kerala, I don't think expenditure is very much above the ceiling limits. But Western Indian states, particularly Maharashtra, etc., I suspect they're all moving in the same direction. Even states like Jammu and Kashmir, years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I was stunned to discover, I thought Jammu and Kashmir politics would be about polarization on grounds of religion, some agitations for special status or independence or whatever. No, we all know the history of Kashmir and the legacy, etc. But even in a state like that, money played a very big hand, and it continues to play a big role. That is when I felt that Jammu and Kashmir will never secede from India, because it became a part of the mainstream India in terms of political culture. Northeast India, there are senior politicians who told me that they could not contest elections even though their parties offered them nomination, because they could not afford to spend 70 crores, 100 crores for a Lok Sabha election. So sadly, while it varies from state to state, the actual amount spent in the elections, overall in the country, the trajectory, the expenditure is growing. And in the 4 southern states I mentioned, about 25 crores per assembly candidate, serious assembly candidate, is not an unusual phenomenon. It's pretty much normalized now. Correspondingly, about 75 to 100 crores for a Lok Sabha candidate is not unusual. It's now more or less normalized. And considering that this expenditure is about 100 times more than the ceiling prescribed, if we now pretend as if the problem is the ceiling or the money legitimately collected for legitimate and transparent political activities, and much of the debate in India is around these things. While each of these elements is important, I think we are missing the wood for the trees. We have to recognize. And unfortunately, there is a certain blind spot in India in our debates. Some years ago, I remember Mr. Gopinath Munde, a seasoned MP and formerly Deputy Chief Minister in Maharashtra. He publicly stated that he had to spend about 8 crore rupees to be elected as an MP, which actually is pretty low by Andhra Pradesh and Telangana standards, I can assure you, even by that time. Now, what he was stating was a cry of despair. Look, things are really bad. What should we do? Prime Minister Vajpayee used to mention in the parliament and outside repeatedly. He used to say, all of us are starting our political careers with a lie by signing an affidavit that the expenditure is within the ceiling prescribed by law. We all know it's not true. Let's do something about it. He could not do much about it because he had no political power. Though he was the Prime Minister, he was really presiding over a very unwieldy coalition. The time was not perhaps opportune. But if we pretend as if politics as usual can continue without hurting the country or economy or a democracy, I think we have to re-examine our assumptions. There is a grave danger ahead. So Mrs. Sitharaman, I think she did a service to us by openly acknowledging that excessive role of illegitimate money power is ensuring that people like her, the public-spirited, genuine, honest citizens, and in every party we have people, the Manmohan Singhs of the world and many others across the spectrum. If they are precluded from contesting seriously in the Lok Sabha election or state assembly election, the country is the poorer. The political recruitment is now based primarily on caste, pedigree, and money. In fact, the first question asked of the intending candidate by major political parties is, how much money can you spend? Now, I think this is a very sad thing. If money leads to power, power leads to money, we're in a very dangerous, vicious cycle.
So where is this expenditure going towards?
A lot of it is going towards giving money and gifts to voters on a fairly large scale. Now, two things we must understand. That you give money does not mean you get the vote. You must not be confused. No, some people think, my God, therefore you can buy an election. No, you cannot. The money that you give has become now a bit like an entrance fee. Until I get the money from you, I do not consider you as a serious contender. Therefore, no matter how many people are on the ballot, the real contest in the minds of the voters is between these 2 or 3 players who actually have doled out significant amounts of money. So it is distorting the election outcome, not in the sense of, money automatically translating into vote. It is distorting in the sense that if you don't give money, you have no chance. Doesn't matter what your qualifications are, your credentials are, your service record is, your qualities as a public servant or as a representative are, they're irrelevant. If enough money is not distributed, then you're not a serious contender. So that is the biggest chunk. There are, I think, also other unseemly activities. I don't know if it's widely spread across the country, but I have heard of cases where each police station gets some significant amount of money as a goodwill money. There will be some irregularities, some may be minor technical irregularities, some may be significant irregularities, you wink at it. Otherwise, no, the nuisance value of the regulatory agencies will harass the political parties. Some other activities, for instance, sadly, again, it started in then Andhra Pradesh, this paid news concept. I'm sorry to have to say this. No, media are important for us. Media freedom is very important for us. But if you don't pay a significant amount as a package to the newspaper or newspapers, maybe TV channels also, I do not know, during election time, they simply black you out. Now, publicity is the oxygen of politics. If you are not at all covered, or if the newspapers say you're an inconsequential candidate, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You require to be covered. One minister, when I was the legislator, he came up to me and said, look, you're fighting for probity in politics and cleaning up the electoral system, political system, governance, etc. All these admirable goals. You have entered political life out of principle and as a means of reform, and you don't care whether you're elected or not. But we are serious people in politics. We want to be elected. And we genuinely want to do some good, but we believe getting elected is important and we have a political career in mind. There's nothing wrong with that. Even if I do nothing wrong, if I don't pay 2 crores at the time you mentioned to me, if I didn't spend 2 crores to get my name covered in newspapers during the election time, I'm a nobody. I start off with that. And even that is illegitimate expenditure way above the ceiling limit prescribed. At that time, 28 lakhs, I think, was the ceiling limit prescribed. Or maybe at that time, actually only 15 lakhs, if I'm not mistaken. This was 2009, 2010. So tell me, what is the answer? I have no answer. So it's not merely about political parties and politicians. It's very widespread. In an assembly constituency in a state like Telangana or Andhra Pradesh, typically, there are probably about 2 lakh voters per assembly segment, 1.8 lakhs, 2 lakh voters per assembly segment. Sometimes a little more than 2.5 maybe. About 60% of the voters, particularly if they are rural areas, 60 to 70% of the voters, they are distributed money. And there is a very efficient, very, very sophisticated and extremely innovative means of distribution of money take place. Because as the election commission gives more and more guidelines and seizes more and more money and all kinds of things happen, your car and my car, they are stopped during election time when you travel anywhere. But despite all that, this is happening because that means the parties have become very adept, candidates have become very adept at figuring out how to distribute the money. So these are the 3 that I can think of. But I'm sure in more unsavory places, there may be also money to hire musclemen to bully people, though there is no actual booth capturing in India. That's no longer there. It used to be there in some pockets of India earlier. Within the polling booth, things are as good as they can be. From voting to counting to declaration of results, that's not a problem. The problem is what happens behind the polling booth before the polling.
So 25 to 30 crores per candidate in an assembly constituency and 70 to 80 crores per candidate in a parliamentary constituency. So is it a demand side problem or a supply side problem?
See, it's easy to say that the people are bad. The reason why it's happened is once people do not see the link between the vote and what happens because I voted for you, Ankit, what happens to me? As opposed to Ankit, I voted for a rogue. What happens to me? There is no clarity in our minds because power is divorced from people. In a highly centralized system, people don't understand what really am I getting by voting for X, Y, or Z. So what's happened is electoral contest is reduced to short-term maximization.
Right.
Because if there's nothing I get out of the election anyway, I don't understand, I don't get enough of it. I'm not saying universally in every constituency it's true, but in a broad sense, this is something that is true in the country. When I don't see how my vote is affecting my life at a very personal level, family level, in a way that I can understand, then I must get something out of it. Because the only thing I realized as a voter is that somehow by my vote you are becoming a new monarch. You are the next king of the constituency. That is our conception of the vote in the large part. Let's face it. It doesn't mean that we are terrible. It means that democracy is a work in progress. It's evolving. It's better than what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago, but we still have a long way to go. But we must acknowledge what is the current situation in the country. Now, given that situation, in a poor country, and given the universal disrepute the politicians suffer from, generally the perception of the country in the media, middle class of the people is, see, the moment that fellow gets into power, I don't know how, but he's making no millions. His life is made. That is the perception. It's not true. A large number of politicians actually are squandering money for recognition. They're not corrupt personally, and therefore they're actually losing out big time. And for I know in this current election cycle, there are people from the Telugu states, who are members of parliament or assembly, who are declining to contest, though they are popular and they will be elected, because they already spent money in the last earlier elections. They got elected. They realized, no, it's a wasteful endeavor, and they're not intending to make money through public office. And even if they were otherwise wealthy, the wealth is getting dissipated, businesses are getting hurt. There are some cases where they're becoming insolvent. They may not publicly state so. There are also a few cases where they're actually committing suicide. So it's not that the politicians are enjoying. It's not a fight between good and evil. In India, we love to convert everything into good and evil. Politicians are bad, therefore they're doing it. No, it's much more complicated. Once the bug of being recognized, being important, influential, being respected in society catches them, they become captives now. Yes, some people are certainly converting political office into money. But that requires the traditional old-fashioned notion of taking a bribe doesn't work in politics, really. That requires your ability to actually have a business, your opportunity to have a business, and then convert your political clout into a business opportunity. Not many people have that. So the notion that many politicians are raking in hundreds of crores of rupees through political power is nonsensical. Some numbers are making abnormal amounts of money. The others are simply losing money. And they're really going through enormous stress for the sin of being in public life. So we have to really understand what's happening. The other side of the coin is, apart from the lack of understanding on the part of the voter, the electoral system. Unthinkingly, almost through sleepwalking, without any serious debate on why we should go for the first past the post system that Britain, our colonial country, had. We simply embraced it because that's how elections were held, such as they were before freedom. We did have legislative councils, legislative assemblies with limited electorate. There were some elections. The elections were based on the British model. Therefore, we followed the same model, first past the post system. Now, for our country, at our level of understanding, and with our diversity and caste and primordial loyalties, etc., first past the post system is very unsuited. Because one vote more means you win, one vote less means you lose. So it's no longer about ideas, it's no longer about the agenda, it's about somehow a candidate getting one more vote in a constituency. Even if you get just one less vote, you are a nobody. That's why third parties find it near impossible to survive in our climate. If they do survive for some time, most of them disappear. Now, in such a system, you must remember that there is intense political competition. For some reason in India, Indians love power. We worship power without purpose. Across the spectrum, it's not the top leaders or something, it's the people across the spectrum. It's a culture. From a family to the country, being in a dominant position is our single-minded obsession as a country for very strange reasons. So given that, in a first past the post system, the parties, the cadres, the candidate and others, they worked for years and years and years. In agitations, money, time, energy, etc. So it's almost like a lottery now, election time. And now, if 1 more crore we spend, there is a chance. And after going through all this trouble, it's very difficult to say no.
Mhm.
So this competitive urge to somehow manage to get in. And even if those who get in very often, unless they are rapaciously corrupt and also adapted corruption, they are therefore disappointed subsequently because they find, what is it happening? One day I remember a sarpanch in Karnataka, in a very poor, small interior village in Karnataka. The sarpanch himself came from, I think, the backward classes because in local governments there is representation for all communities. And that's how he got an opportunity. He needed some help in the family to settle his son or somebody, a lakh and a half rupees. So I asked him, you contested elections recently as sarpanch and you won. How much did you spend? He said 10 lakh rupees. I said, you are struggling for 1 lakh rupees. Why did you spend 10 lakh for this position? He gave me a wonderful reply, which is at once graphic and revealing. He put both his hands on his head and said, Unmadam, sir, Unmadam. Unmadam is a Sanskrit word which means madness. It's commonly used in Kannada. Kannada, Telugu, etc., they're highly Sanskritized. So the word Unmadam is used as a Kannada word very commonly. That is the most accurate expression. It's not because of some evil. We're all thinking there's some evil out there. No. What has that poor BC genuine person done? He's not evil. He somehow got seduced by the idea that a sarpanch will be important, respected. For some of them, maybe there is also some hope that by unknown means some money can be made. And they get trapped into this. And they spend excessively. So it's a complicated mess. Therefore, in the short term, you have to look at the electoral system so that one vote does not make a difference. The incentive to buy the vote disappears. In the long term, you must focus on deepening our democracy, making people realize the link between vote and consequences, localizing power with accountability. Now, the first one, the parties have to examine. Constitution provides for it. The second one, there is no constituency in India. Middle classes, the media, the politicians and the bureaucrats, they're all universally opposed to decentralization in India. They are for centralization. Occasionally, some people may genuinely want decentralization. Others may sort of, use the shibboleths. They sort of, say perfunctorily, they claim that they want it. But in reality, the evidence is compelling and conclusive, except in Kerala. There is no part of India where genuine local governments are allowed to be formed or allowed to thrive.
So, are we facing a leadership crisis in politics due to the high costs involved?
Unquestionably. Unquestionably. See, what is the source of political recruitment in the country? One, money. The first question asked, and I think I'm saying without fear of contradiction, in most parts of India or in many parts of India, the first question of the aspirants being asked is, how much money can you spend? If you cannot answer, I'll bring 20, 30 crores, you are not a contender. Next is your pedigree. Khandan, your father, your mother, your somebody uncle, somebody else, etc. The third is caste. Now, caste is not to be completely ignored because, after all, representation legitimacy is required. But if caste becomes the defining principle of politics, and I'm a criminal, but the moment I emerge as a caste leader, I'm eligible to be political. Every criminal who became a politician, he used caste or community as a calling card. He emerged as a leader of a particular caste, or sometimes in Hindu-Muslim context, leader of a certain minority faith. And because you have money power as a criminal, because you have draped yourselves in that caste or communal color, and because you have a fierce organization, loyal organization, musclemen to support you, you become actually much more electable than the rest. Now, if these are the considerations on which the choice of candidates is made, how can that be based on public good? What we require in politics is the finest citizens, public-spirited citizens, people with credibility, with integrity, with the spirit of public service, and with the requisite leadership qualities and ability to come up with ideas and execute them. The system must have the ability to attract them first into politics, make politics hospitable. Many such people are deterred by politics. Today, in many parts of India, politics has become unfortunately a dirty word.
Mm.
Politics is and ought to be a noble endeavor. And if a society, the best in a society shun politics, the society will suffer from bad governance. The whole nation suffers. And unfortunately, right now, that's happening in the country. The best are deterred from entering politics, and those who enter, they're paying a supreme price unless they become corrupt. So either they are slowly ejected out,
Mm.
or they themselves step out because they realize they simply cannot afford that, or they compromise over time ultimately and become part of the problem. So it's not because they're evil. We have to seriously look at the electoral system. And how many people can you send through upper house?
Mm.
So it can't be solved overnight, but there must be an honest discussion in the country beyond parties. Take Mr. Narendra Modi or Mallikarjuna Kharge or any other party leader. Most of the party leaders, most of the time, want credible candidates who bring
Right.
value to the party. Because after all, they want to earn the goodwill and the mandate of the people. They want to be popular. And they want to reshape the society in their vision within the bounds of the constitution. That's what politics is about. Today, what is happening? Even if you are popular, even if your intentions are pure, your power depends on your ability to get some people elected local.
Mm.
You give the overall ambience. Without a party, almost none of them get elected. But because of the first past the post situation, the party vote, while it is there, the extra vote they bring by the money or caste or muscle or some other element which is unsavory or pedigree, that becomes necessary. If you remember in the Himachal Pradesh assembly election, this was the assembly election in a small state. The Prime Minister of India was compelled to make a phone call to a dissident MLA, a rebel candidate from his party, pleading with him to withdraw. And he declined.
Mm.
I don't know what happened to him. Maybe we can verify whether that gentleman actually won the election or not as an independent. Now, is it in the interest of the country that you force the head of a major political party or the leader of the nation to plead with an MLA candidate, no matter how popular or powerful you are, that you have to plead with them? That is the burden of first past the post system in Indian conditions.
Mm.
So how can the recruitment be good, political recruitment? And in a situation like this, what happened is the stakes have now gone up dramatically. Once I spent 100 crores in an election, or intending to be elected, I spent crores of rupees nurturing the cadres and then nurturing the constituency, doing good things. Summertime, water tankers with my name plastered there at my personal cost. Then something else, some community hall, some cricket things. No, crores of rupees are spent even before the election, even before the notification of election, for a candidate to be known, particularly when they are fresh entrants who want to be recognized by their party and hoping for a seat or nomination. Now, once you invest that kind of money, the stakes go up. It's no longer public service. My God, I invested so much money.
Mm.
What's the point? I must get elected no matter what. So it becomes a very competitive race from which it's very difficult to escape. So we have to change the electoral system, but in a manner that does not destabilize India. And in the long term, we have to make people aware of through local governance, people aware of the link between the vote and the consequences to their lives. Because local governments are the best schools for democracy, well designed, with proper accountability. I'm not saying local governments, there is no money power. There is even more money power in local governments because the marginal value of a single vote is higher in local governments. There are small constituencies.
Mm.
In Assembly or Lok Sabha, Assembly 2.5 lakh votes, Lok Sabha 10-15 lakh votes. Therefore, each vote is not that important. Whereas in a municipal council or someplace where 1,000 votes matter, only 1,000, 2,000 votes are fought for, each vote is more valuable. So right now, the expenditure in local elections per vote is probably even higher in many cases. Therefore, it's not a short-term issue. In the long term, when people understand how this vote has made a difference to my life, then money becomes less important. It's a long-term issue. And we squandered that opportunity in the last 75 years. Tragically in India, by not doing it right from the beginning, by not allowing local governments to flourish. Only for a short period in some pockets of India we allowed them to flourish. The 73rd, 74th amendments were brought in with good intentions. They created very perfunctory, nominal local governments, overstructured, underpowered, emasculated in most parts of India. So this is, again, Shabalit, we keep pretending that we have some wonderful mechanism, but there's nothing there.
Sir, in public discussion, whenever we talk about expenditures, an idea that's always thrown is the government funding elections. Does the math support us?
Not at all. Absolutely not. You see, look at government funding anywhere in the world. Look at Britain and Germany. Government does give a fund, a small fund, for running the parties. On the basis of the number of votes that the party got in the last election, they get a few pounds per vote or a few euros per vote or whatever. That is enough to run the political party. Election time, they raise funds in the form of voluntary contributions.
Right.
In addition to government fund, actually much of the expenditure is incurred during normal time from the membership dues. Members pay roughly 50, 60 euros or pounds. Not the total, not extraordinary, but not zero. No, it's not, you have a website and say anybody can enroll as a member just to say member, you're a member. No, there are serious memberships. There are serious people who care for those ideals, those goals. And only those who believe in that, they'll participate. In India, you know what is happening. In the US, there is public funding only for the presidential election, both for the primaries and the general election. But with conditions. One, unless you raise a large number of small contributions, you will not be eligible for public funding. A large number of small contributions. If you get one person gives you, let's say, $100 million, that will not count. There are some rules. The second, you must agree to limit your expenditure below a certain limit. Now, earlier, it was quite common that candidates were actually seeking public funding. Nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, almost no candidate is seeking public funding because they want to exceed the limit. They're able to raise money on their own because they don't want to, they won't follow those conditions. Remember, even when such money is given, only in America, when the public funding is accepted, it is for the campaign. Whereas elsewhere, it is for running the party. Now, in India, what is the problem? First of all, politics is about persuading people. It's about uniting people. It's about building coalitions of various segments of society. It's about inspiring people on the basis of an ideology or an agenda. Now, if you have no capacity to inspire people on the basis of an ideology or agenda, if you want the public, the taxpayer, to support you as by a matter of right, then perhaps the political process is not bureaucratized. While there is a case to fund parties to a limited extent based on the vote to run the parties on a day-to-day basis, there is no serious case for funding the party campaign. In any case, as we have discussed, the real expenditure in elections is not the legitimate campaign expenditure.
Right.
For legitimate campaign expenditure, already in 2003, the law came about. FDR, Loksatta were instrumental partly in making that happen after the Harita scam. I persuaded all the political leaders across the spectrum in the country and all the major statesmen, elder statesmen, including Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, then former Prime Minister, still alive, to utilize the opportunity to push for a funding mechanism which is transparent and which is easy. And that's how India probably is the only major country where the donor gets 100% tax exemption. Individual or corporate, we said initially 5% of the net average over 3 years. Because the donors, corporate donors, were not willing to fund even with tax exemption because they feared retribution. They feared blackmailing and harassment by their rival parties. Mr. Arun Jaitley came up with the idea of secret funding but legitimate funding by check to electoral bonds. They get tax exemption, party shows the money receipts and spend legitimately and accountably, but the source is not revealed. But we know what happened subsequently, the course, etc. So that is only about legitimate expenditure in any case. When the illegitimate expenditure is about 50 to 100 times the actual ceilings prescribed, what is our case? Are we saying, therefore, the Indian taxpayer should spend money for illegitimate expenditure in elections? How laughable it is. The problem is eliminating the need for that. Demand for that money should disappear by altering the incentives, by changing the electoral system in the immediate sense, and in the long term by deepening our democracy by a variety of systemic reforms. Without doing that, no, it's an old-fashioned approach of a nanny state. You want to contest elections, better take money and contest. What is this? Leadership is serious business. People must trust you. A political party runs on the basis of sacrifices, dreams, and aspirations of millions of people over generations. A political party is not, an organization that comes, today out of thin air and then said, no, it's not the way. A political party must represent the aspirations of people.
Sir, in terms of way forward, you said in the short term we need electoral systemic reform in the electoral system. You said you talked about in the long term we need more awareness on the link between votes and the consequences. You also talked about strengthening local governments, genuinely strengthening them. Where is your hope for better politics?
Twofold. I'm a great optimist. I believe in the last 75 years, we haven't done very badly. We could have done better. But we're not a failure. We're not a failed state. We're not a failed democracy. We're a flawed democracy, to be fair. And then, which democracy is not flawed?
Right.
With our experience, with our background, with our mass poverty, with large illiteracy even today, without understanding democratic institutions, it's amazing that actually we sustained our democracy and ran it reasonably well. But in the last 20, 30 years, the good news is that federalism has become much stronger. Many people will be surprised because the debate is unreal in the country. It's divorced from actual facts. We are confused by personalities and style, ignoring the substance. States are more powerful than ever before in the history of our country, independent India. And it happened largely since the late 80s and 90s, mostly in the 90s, on the last 30 years, I would say. But the third tier has become incredibly weak, despite the constitutional amendments. Even the good elements of third tier local governments in the 1960s and 70s for some time. In some states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, to some extent Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka, and of course Kerala, even those disappeared. But most important of all, general politics decline. Money, power, and politics has become much, much more pronounced in the last 30, 35 years.
Right.
So even as an optimist, I recognize that there's been a tremendous decline. And there is no constituency in India at this point of time for serious political reform. We're only fighting each other, shouting at each other, abusing each other, scoring political brownie points without actually honestly introspecting, looking at the systemic problems and overcoming them. Therefore, my first and great hope is economic opportunity. If people are less dependent on politics, or politicians patronage on a day-to-day basis locally, if their incomes rise, they become more confident, they become more self-reliant, then they will start thinking of freedom, democracy, making the system work better, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I think the unrelenting task of India should be, uncompromising goal should be, how do we accelerate growth process of India? With the fiscal discipline in the country, or building infrastructure, encouraging the climate of investment, improving the skills of the people to make them productive members of the society, improving at least some elements of rule of law to make sure that economic growth is not impeded by failure of rule of law, and extending the benefit of growth to small towns, encouraging growth of small towns so that urban-rural linkages are there, agricultural transformation. No, these issues that are vitally required for sustained high economic growth rate will not only improve the quality of life, but also automatically generate forces for better democracy. So right now we have growth opportunity, and that's why in FDR, Loksatta, a lot of our attention concern nowadays is how do you ensure there is a harmonious and inclusive, sustained high growth for the next 20, 30 years, because there's an opportunity. The second is, I'm sure the serious and senior leaders of political parties, many of them care deeply for the country. They also understand the pain of politics. While they may not be able to admit publicly what is happening, they also know how much they are now entirely captive in the hands of local powerful elements who blackmail them. Come election time, the amount of the kind of things that go on, people switching loyalties instantly. You don't give me a seat, or I'll go there, because there's no party, there's no audio, there's no loyalty. Either I am in or I am out. If you don't give me a chance, I'll go there. Next day, you're there. A former chief minister goes to another party, becomes a candidate. A former something with another party becomes it's become so common now. It's very humiliating. And you have to beg the rich people to contest. And you have to ask the question, how much money do you have? I don't think any self-respecting senior leader really feels good about it. Let's face it. So if they recognize that there are viable alternatives available, and without the negatives, for instance, proportional representation, what does it mean? It means the number of seats that the party gets is proportionate to the number of votes the party gets in a state. Let's make the state the unit.
Right.
There's much more detail, but I don't want to complicate it. Now, what happens then? It doesn't matter whether a candidate spends money in a particular geography and gets a few more votes or not. Overall, the credibility of the party, the agenda, and the overall credibility of the caliber of the candidates and their track record, that will shape public opinion and enhance the voting percentage. The second thing is, the candidate today is spending money because we are in an insane country, pardon my saying so. I'm not casting aspersions on our country, but I'm talking of the political system, where getting into power or getting into office has become a matter of life or death. In such a situation, if I am elected or not elected, I am willing to spend money to ensure that I get elected. Because my spending gives me vote. But if a pool of candidates is getting elected by spending, why should I spend for you to be elected?
Right.
The incentive is completely altered.
Yes.
And therefore, quickly, the kind of vote buying money power will decline. Vote buying will become irrelevant. But there is a downside to it. We must be honest, because any reform, there's no perfect system. There's a downside to it. The first downside is, how do you choose candidates? Already in Rajya Sabha, etc., there are cases where money changes hands with the top leadership. If in the lower house, if you're paying money to the people, upper house, you're paying money to the party bosses. I suppose any day it's better to pay to the people, the voters, the poor people, rather than the party bosses.
Right.
So, some kind of a democratization of the choice of candidates. There are ways. I believe European method is a good method. You can have some system by which, in a transparent manner, mediated by maybe the election commission or some other statutory body, actually making sure. Now, I remember I monitored the presidential and parliamentary election and local elections on the same day in Kenya in 2002. After 27 years of dictatorship under Daniel Arap Moi, the leader of the ruling party, African National Congress, after 27 years, elections were held for the first time. The dictator's son wanted to contest as a parliament candidate on behalf of his father's party. Dictator's son. But they institutionalized, though they had dictatorship for 27 years, they institutionalized primary elections within the constituency. The dictator's son, the president's son, could not be nominated because the members of the party voted against him. Now, we are very proud of our democracy. There are many things good about our country. We have to export them. But we also have to learn from others. If Kenya, which hardly had any democratic history until that time, in 2002, they could build a system where the dictator president's son could not become the candidate, can we honestly claim that India is anywhere close to that? So we have to democratize our parties. How to do it in the best possible way, we can discuss. The second is, almost by definition, in a proportionality-based system, you cannot have a stable majority government.
Right.
And whatever reason, Indians want a stable majority government. That is our general preference. Though the evidence is, in countries like Germany, it actually is building very harmonious coalitions and there are stable governments. There is honest negotiation. But let's not go that far. We have to ensure that the largest party becomes the majority party.
Right.
Even if they don't get 50% votes. That's what. Because right now in the first past the post system, in India's elections, no party at the national level ever got 50% vote.
Right.
But we got huge majorities. So can we create a system of proportional representation, but with an assured stable majority for the largest party? You can do it easily. If you give the largest party bonus votes, let's say 10 or 15% seats extra, but the basic election is based on proportionality system, then we can easily ensure political stability and majority in the legislature. At the same time, the incentive for the election itself is not based on vote buying and other very unhappy calculations. So it doesn't mean you can do it overnight. Constitutionally, it's very simple because the Constitution provides for that. Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues thought about it, though there's not much discussion on that. So if you actually look at the provisions in the Constitution, it provides a multi-member constituencies. In India in 1952 and 1957, we actually had multi-member constituencies through which reservations were given. There were no SC constituencies in 52 and 57, the first two Lok Sabha elections or assembly elections. There were no ST constituencies. Wherever they needed reservation, they made them multi-member constituencies. There were 2 members elected in the constituency rather than 1 member. Because they did it not very elegantly, Mr. B.V. Giri could not be elected in one constituency. So Congress party panicked and converted that into single-member constituencies and reservations rather than the earlier good practice. Whatever the problem was, they could have corrected it. So the Constitution permits it. All you require is a simple law. Of course, it's a significant reform, but parties must come together and do it in a manner that every party feels is good for the country and good for them. It certainly will improve our democracy.
Thank you, sir, for assuring us that there is light at the end of the tunnel.